One of the more unique inclusions to Free Houses is the addition of broken weapons, as instead of weapons just poofing into nothing when their durability is depleted, they get replaced with a broken one that is really bad. The only value the player can usually gain from these is to use their low damage output to farm class mastery on an easy skirmish map, but other than that they're pretty much worthless, and they're primarily there to punish the player. So I thought it might make for an interesting challenge to attempt to beat the game using only these weapons. With the rules being I can only attack with broken weapons, I cannot use offensive magic to attack, but supportive magic is allowed, all gambits are allowed, and my only restriction on DLC content is I'm not allowed to pick up the Chalice of Beginnings. So with the rules set in place, I now booted up my game, selected Maddening Classic for the difficulty, and picked Male Byleth. After this, we proceeded on to the first map, and for this challenge, I've replaced every unit's starting inventory to include a broken weapon, so this challenge can begin immediately. And as you can see, we don't stand a chance in a head-on fight. And because broken weapons have zero durability, I can't even use combat arts for extra damage and hit. So I had to retreat Byleth, Edelgard, and Claude to the right, then I unequipped Dimitri's Broken Lance so he wouldn't suffer a speed penalty. I then ended turn by baiting the thief south. Next, I retreated with Claude and Byleth, but with Edelgard I moved her south of Dimitri, hoping for the thief to attack her to her left. Unfortunately, they attacked to her right. So I now had to run left with Edelgard and position in a way that it was certain that the thief would attack next to Geralt, making him attack the thief with an accurate Iron Lance. And this was my main plan here, kill the enemies with Geralt, who was both strong and accurate. With the first thief taken down, I now decided to sneak past the other enemies using the forests to the left side. Here I expected that Geralt would start moving once I baited out Costas, which wasn't the case, and I was forced to run away, which I couldn't really do, as the enemy squad was entirely comprised of thieves that can move freely through the forests, so they chased me down and eventually killed Byleth, forcing me to reset. Next time, I killed the first thief the same way as before, and now, instead of heading straight towards Costas, I decided to bait these two thieves towards the bottom of the map so Geralt could destroy them. I tried my best to secure some kills with Claude's bow for some EXP, but my attacks didn't land, which is a good transition to how this game's RNG works, as while it may display a 27% chance to hit, this is actually wrong, as the game uses two random numbers to determine hit, which just means that high hit rates are higher than they appear, and low hit rates are much lower than they appear. And that is a big problem for this run, as our hit rates are very bad. Anyway, I now lured in the 3 other enemies to the north, then secured my first kill for this run, and the other 2 enemies died to Geralt. With just Costas' squad remaining, Geralt will now actually move and fight the 3 remaining units on the map. So it should have been an easy win, but Geralt can't actually land the killing blow on Costas, so Dimitri had to kill them, and unsurprisingly he missed and died. So I had to attempt that map again, and this time Dimitri missed again, but fortunately managed to survive the enemy's attack. Unfortunately, Geralt missed his attack, so I couldn't kill Costas on this turn, so I had to unequip my weapons to survive an enemy phase. And after Geralt's turn, if just one attack landed, we would win. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and we died. As they say, third time's the charm, so obviously I hit them this time, right? I did. We now arrive at the monastery, and we're given a choice of which house to teach, just like how you're given a choice to like, comment, and subscribe. Here I chose the Blue Lions because I thought they had the best starting team for this run, and I needed strong units to stand a chance in Chapter 2. Going into this challenge, I believed that this map was probably going to be the hardest in the entire game, as there are many powerful enemies and we have terrible hit rates on them. At first, I just boosted up the Do, then placed them in range of Lorenz. Here, I got lucky and landed an attack on Lorenz. Since both Dorothea and Ignatz approached, I now had to retreat and rely on unreliable enemy phase counterattacks to defeat Lorenz. But I couldn't kill him quickly enough, and I was backed into the bottom left corner of the map with 3 enemies alive. That swiftly destroyed me, forcing a reset. Since I now had an idea of how this map would play out, I used all 4 DLC stat boosters on Dimitri, as I knew I was going to be very reliant on him. So next time, I enemy phased Lorenz with a rallied Byleth and managed to hit him but took considerable damage, so I had to retreat Byleth out of his range and now use Dimitri to attack on enemy phase. Unfortunately, I missed, so I had to back up again and missed again while Dorothea and Ignatz split up. To keep Dorothea away, I moved Byleth north to distract her, and I moved Dedue east to do the same for Ignatz, while Dimitri continued to fight Lorenz and managed to land an attack, but he was dropped to low HP, so I tried to land a hit with Felix, but he missed. So I healed Dimitri with a vulnerary, traded Felix a sword, and on enemy phase I was lucky as Felix landed an attack boosted by his crest. From here, I just had to land one attack to kill one of the 10 units on the map. Unfortunately, I didn't land either of these two attacks, and I had to attempt this map again. But now, I had a decent plan for the first couple turns. I just had to get lucky enough to kill Lorenz. 5 attempts later, I managed to land 3 out of 4 counterattacks on Lorenz, another and he'd die. With a solid hit chance of 44%, Felix dispatched Lorenz, and now we had to face 2 much easier opponents with Dorothea and Ignatz. For Dorothea, I just lured her away with Byleth to use up her Thunder magic, clearing some space for me to bait Ignatz to move left, where I could surround him so he couldn't attack me, making him easy to kill. As for Dorothea, she had now run out of uses of Thunder, so she was using weaker sword attacks. So I carefully moved so she was just in range of Dedue, who with his personal skill active took 0 damage from her sword attacks, making it safe to spend a couple turns waiting for him to land enough attacks for me to kill her with Dimitri. Next, I decided to approach Claude's squad, baiting Hilda to attack Dedue. With Dedue, I now retreated to the lower forests for the extra defense and avoid, while Hilda chased after him, with my plan being to break her weapon. As for Claude, he split up from her, heading towards my other units that could swiftly surround him and begin attacking, eventually resulting in a kill. Now, I began to move up and engaged Hanuman. The problem here is he has a decent chance to crit me for an instant game over. Fortunately, this time that didn't happen, and with the heal tiles healing, Byleth and later Dimitri lasted long enough for Hanuman's magic to run out of uses. So now, I could safely kill him, but I was pretty sure if I did that, the Black Eagles would charge towards me. That I didn't want to happen yet. Therefore, I lured Hilda up to the heal tile, which made for an easy location to break her weapon. Ironically enough here, I forgot how broken weapons work in this game and thought her weapon was going to disappear, which it obviously doesn't. So I moved in Dedue to hold her off, which is much easier now since he can counterattack on her, and she deals far less damage and her avoid was much lower. While Hilda was distracted, I decided now was the perfect time to engage the Black Eagles. So I placed Dimitri in range of Hubert, expecting Ferdinand and Edelgard to move with him, but they didn't. That was useful information for the future. I now plan to deal with Hubert the same way I dealt with Dorothea, of using up his magic, then slowly killing him with Dedue when he used sword attacks. After this, I realized I couldn't take this map slow anymore. I had to move right and lure in Ferdinand, but that caused both Felix and then later Dedue to die, and this attempt couldn't win from here. If you're wondering why I made the risky play with Dedue, in Free Houses, every map effectively has a 99 turn limit. If you reach the 100th turn, you just game over, which forced me to take some risks that caused me to just lose. But for my next attempt, I had a solid idea of how to win, and I knew I had to be careful with the 99 turn limit. To just get another run going, I had to attempt this map like 50 more times, as surviving the first few turns took some really good luck. The first change in plan came when I fought Hanuman, as I chose to equip a weapon so he would double me, using up his magic twice as fast compared to last time, which saved me a few turns in the long run. While doing this, I steadily moved Dedue up to the heal tile, so just as Hanuman ran out of uses of his magic, he could take the tile and then have an easy time breaking Hilda's hand axe. Right now, I was on around turn 50, so I should have enough time to deal with the Black Eagles. And once Hilda's weapon broke, I lured her away to the left and baited in Hubert with Byleth, then switched him out with Dimitri and positioned on the heal tile to use up Hubert's miasma. To the south, I sent Byleth left to distract Hilda so I could safely replace Dimitri with Dedue on the heal tile. Then I moved right with Dedue to lure in Ferdinand. Here, I needed Hilda to be occupied to do this, or I'd risk Dedue getting surrounded. I then lured Hilda towards him and placed him back on the heal tile, as with its healing, he was practically invincible, and in the remaining like 30 turns, eventually all 3 of his opponents should die or take heavy damage from his counterattacks. So now my 4 other units had to deal with Manuela and Edelgard. First, I fought Manuela by luring her away from the heal tile, then I broke her Nosferatu, and since she couldn't fight back, it was a free win. Now, the only difficult opponent remaining was Edelgard. With her high attack and defense, my best odds at defeating her was to place Dimitri on the eastern heal tile to bait her in, then I could safely attack her from a distance with bows with Byleth and Felix. Additionally, if Dimitri was on full health, I felt confident enough to equip a lance to try for a counterattack on her. Eventually, with some luck, Felix activated his crest and landed a hit with his bow, dropping Edelgard to just 1 HP, in range for me to kill if she didn't heal with a vulnerary. I now adjusted my plan to rely more on Dimitri's enemy phase counterattacks so she wouldn't immediately heal, and I had 1 turn to finish her off. But the map wasn't over yet. I still had 4 units to defeat by Dedue, and I only had about 12 turns to do so. On my way there, Dedue managed to take out Hubert, so now I was faced with just 3 enemies. First, I lured out Hilda, landed a counterattack, and on player phase, finished her off. Fortunately, Ferdinand's lance had broken, so he had a big speed and avoid penalty, so it was safe to strike him on player phase with Dimitri and Dedue. With a safe bow attack from Byleth, I dispatched him, leaving just an unarmed Hanuman who was easy, and I won on turn 94. After this, we could explore the monastery and recruit Balthus, who's really good because of his personal skill, and Yuri, who's okay I guess. We could also recruit Happy and Constance here, but they aren't going to be useful without healing magic, so I didn't recruit them yet. Next, we could begin tutoring our students. For Dimitri, I wanted to reach A rank in Authority as soon as possible to pick up the incredible combo of Battalion Wrath and Vantage. Dimitri included all of my combat units, eventually wanted to reach D+ in bows to reclass to Archer for hit plus 20, which is really good since broken weapons have awful hits. And the best endgame class for most combat units for this run seemed to be Warmaster, as they have quick riposte, which is really good, crit plus 20 to increase our odds of killing, and they specialize in the 2 best weapon types for this challenge, with axes and gauntlets. Gauntlets are easily the best as they have the brave effect, making them twice as powerful as other broken weapons, and axes were pretty good since its prowess skills gave the most hit out of the other weapon types. So I eventually planned to turn Dimitri, Felix, and Balthus into Warmasters. As for Dedue, I spec'd him towards Axe and Armor so he could become a guard adjutant for Dimitri in Armor Knight. For Mercedes and Annette, I focused on Faith and Authority, and my remaining units didn't really matter that much. Next, we proceeded on to this relatively unnoteworthy map. The enemies here are fairly weak, they couldn't damage Dedue or Balthus with their personal skills active. However, since my hit rates were low, I had to move most of my squad north to help swiftly dispatch the enemies above, as more enemies soon approached from the east. While Dedue could safely fight them, he couldn't hold all of them off at once, so I had to hide my units together here and just slowly defeat the enemies that approached. With my newly obtained gambits, this wasn't too hard as they were pretty accurate. So eventually we were left with the units surrounding Balthus and Dedue, who just kinda slowly took damage and broke their weapons. When just 2 enemies remained, I saw this as a good opportunity to give Dimitri some weapon levels, and in a forest he just slowly defeated them and we beat the map in 55 turns. So next up was Chapter 2. For this map, I made sure to purchase some Iron Shields as it's pretty much just a free defense boost. And what's also noteworthy is for this challenge, I've made it possible to purchase broken weapons, so I can obtain more of them if I need them. I began turn 1 by luring in the archer, setting the enemies up in a line, so Dimitri could defeat the archer with Assault Troop and rattle the other 2 axe users, giving me a chance to attack with Balthus, then position for the next turn where I could take both of them out. There were now 2 thieves and an archer approaching from the north, so I lined them up again so I could use a gambit to target all 3 of them, lock them in place, and now I could approach them. Unfortunately, the thieves had too much avoid for me to kill them normally, and I had to rely on an inconsistent gambit that fortunately landed. With another archer defeated, another 3-unit enemy squad approached with 2 thieves and a priest. To hold them off, I used a Pure Water with Balthus and placed him on a forest so he would take 0 damage from both the thieves and the priest. But I wasn't sure if I could hold this position as some axe users and an archer were aggroed, so I needed to kill the thieves before they reached me. So I lured a single thief south, and I couldn't reliably hit them, so I was forced to use a gambit, and I had to do the same with the other thief. The enemies now attacking Balthus couldn't deal any damage to him outside of Poison Strike, so I could just end turn with him to slowly take out the axe users. Then I baited the priest south who had run out of uses of Nosferatu, so they were easy. Finally, I could surround the archer and now the initially aggressive enemies were defeated. Next, I wanted the gold in the chest. So I used Bolfus to lure in the 3 nearby axe users who dealt 0 damage to him with normal attacks. But the one with the gambit could debuff him and that caused the other axe users to do damage. So I had to bait them away with someone with lower defense like Dedue. Then I just slowly defeated them. After eventually dispatching the other 2 axe users, I could surround an approaching archer, defeat them, open the chest, and I could finally approach the boss Costus after I dealt with an easy archer and thief. To engage Costus, I lured him in with Dedue, then I debuffed him with a gambit that fortunately landed. Then with Dimitri, I tried to deal damage, but I missed both times. Fortunately, by rallying Byleth's strength, I now saw a kill on the boss if both attacks connected. That they did, so we won. Between here and the next chapter, I recruited Happy and Constance since they could heal now, and reclassed Dimitri to Fighter as I wanted to maximize his strength for chapter 4. Then I used Mission Assistance to gain Hilda as an ally, as I thought her personal skill could be pretty useful in the early stages of this run. In the greenhouse for pretty much this entire run, I was growing mixed herb seeds for strength stat boosters, and later on green flowers for a dex stat booster. Additionally, to boost my stats for basically every chapter, I decided to cook to give my whole team a 2 dex boost, as 2 extra hit was kind of good. What's also noteworthy now is we can now purchase battalions, so everyone can use a gambit, which would make you think the skirmish map would be pretty easy. It wasn't, as like all the enemies charged at me fairly quickly, and I was forced to use gambits so I wasn't overwhelmed. I also had to make use out of this patch of forests to like split the enemies up so I could defeat them in smaller groups. And I also used this to split up the enemy archers. Since this is like a generic skirmish map, I don't really want to go into too much detail on how this map went, just know it took me like 2 hours to beat this. So now we can proceed on to chapter 3. This map is usually quite annoying, mainly because of the archers and the fog, so I didn't really want to deal with it, so my main plan was to just rely on Catherine to just kill everything in her path. I started the map off by using Bolfus to lure down 3 enemies, allowing the green units to assist and attack them for solid damage. Setting up a group flames to finish off the archer, then Felix could defeat the other axe user, then the remaining soldier was pretty bad, so they wasn't a problem. The green units now advanced, and it lured in a big squad of enemies. I couldn't deal with them, so I just retreated, and they killed the weak green units. But Catherine was more than strong enough to take everyone there. But I wanted a little of the EXP, so I dispatched a mercenary and lured 2 foes right, with them both being easy. Once I was done there, Catherine began to attack the Dark Mage, causing the fog, so I moved up to assist and dispatched a few targets coming in from above with gambits, securing me a kill on the mage, clearing the fog and making the map significantly easier. So I now found it pretty easy to approach Lenato, while Catherine's weapon broke and she died. For the remaining enemies near Lenato, I found it easier to defeat them by just backing away and using Dedue to keep some of the weaker ones busy. With enough time, our path to Lenato was cleared, but I had no more uses of Divine Pulse, so I had to be careful, and my first objective was to break Lenato's Javelin, with Bolfus, who took 0 damage from its attacks. With the weapon broken, Lenato could safely be attacked from a distance, but with the heal tiles healing, I wasn't sure if I could actually kill him this way. So I tried to push him with a gambit, and that fortunately landed, and without healing, it was simple to win. Before tackling chapter 4, I built support with Catherine, so she had a C+ support with Byleth, allowing me to recruit her as long as Byleth was level 9, which he was. I recruited Catherine here because I expected her to be pretty good, as she just has really good stats. Anyway, on this chapter we unlocked Tea Time, which is like one of my least favourite parts of this game, as it's just a free charm stat booster locked behind a boring, like 2-minute minigame. The minigame's repetitive and boring, but it does allow me to increase any of my allies' charm by up to 2 per month. Considering I was very reliant on gambits in this run for reliable damage, I pretty much did Tea Time whenever I had spare time. Next, I did this unnoteworthy skirmish map that was kind of boring, but I did specifically spend like 90 turns on this map to gain like over 300 authority experience on Dimitri, finally allowing him to pick up Battalion Vantage. After reclassing Dimitri and Byleth, I began Chapter 4. This map forces a 25 turn limit, so it had the potential to be really hard. To start things off, I lured in the mage and archer, then on my next turn, I surrounded the archer and used a gambit to help take out the mage. After dispatching the archer, I used rally dex and strength on Dimitri, placed him next to Hilda, and ended turn to lure in the Death Knight. With Battalion Vantage and Wrath, Dimitri attacked first and had a high crit chance and was able to one-shot the Death Knight. With the path forward clear, I could advance towards the enemy squad to the left and take them out with punches and gambits. Around this time, the reinforcements appeared, so after finishing off the 2 nearby mages, I turned around and used Stride to initiate an assault with a gambit. With Felix's follow-up, only 1 mage survived and could be defeated with ease on the following turn. All the while, Balthus moved north to fight the weak enemies above. After killing them, I found it quite easy to push along the left side of the map, pick up the Spirit Dust, and approach the powerful Dark Mage boss. With the Blue Lion Brooch, I now just had to land a fairly reliable gambit to take them down and end the chapter. After a little work in the monastery and 2 unnoteworthy skirmish maps, I quickly proceeded on to Chapter 5. For turn 1, I used Stride to quickly engage the first 2 enemy axe users with Catherine, who had good stats and Axebreaker, so she was pretty likely to hit them. With those 2 dispatched, I now placed my attention to the 4 enemy reinforcements to the south, who threatened to kill Gilbert if I left them alive. So I moved in with Stride and weakened the thieves with a gambit, allowing me to take one of them down, along with a mage, and with Physic to heal Gilbert, he was healthy enough to survive another turn. Once the 2 remaining foes were killed, I retreated out of range of the next wave of reinforcements, who like the first wave were defeated with some simple punches and gambits. And Gilbert even survived, who I thought could be useful, but he positioned in range of one of the archers up here. Then he moved out of their range, so they moved away near another enemy, causing that entire enemy squad to move. And since it was a large enemy squad, they moved near more enemies, causing another enemy squad to move with them. Eventually they approached me, and I just didn't have the firepower to take like 10 enemies in a row, so I was forced to reset. Next time, I just let Gilbert die, so the entire map didn't just aggro towards me, but I did aggro this one archer who caused this enemy squad to move. So I had to position well and use 2 well-timed gambits to lock them in place and kill 2 enemies. Since my team could advance close to them, it was easy to defeat the remaining 3 foes on the next turn, and after easily defeating the thief reinforcements, I could move up to face the lone armored unit, who actually dropped a really good item with the accuracy ring boosting accuracy by 10. From here, the path to Mictlan was mostly straightforward. For the next enemy squad, I just used some gambits and punches to win, and I pretty much did the same for the next. I had to be pretty careful around the archers though, and to not bait in too many at once, I placed a more fragile unit at the end of their range, so they'd move in range for me to strike them with a melee weapon. As for the final 2 archers, they could just be surrounded, so now we fought Mictlan, who is pretty easy, as after combat he will take 10 damage because of the Lance of Ruin, so I only had to hit him 1 time, which was pretty easy with Dimitri. He now transformed into a demonic beast, and this fight had the potential to be difficult, as I had used up most of my gambits to make it this far. Fortunately, I had just enough to break their armor, and with some punches with Byleth and Dimitri, I took out their first HP bar. For the second, I had to wait a turn, then use a gambit and strike using Dimitri, and with a crit, they were down to their final HP bar. Unfortunately, this gave them death blow, so now they would one-shot happy, so I had to use Divine Pulse. And this time, I saved a gambit on a more durable character, Felix, who could actually survive their attack, so now I could easily secure the kill with Byleth and end the chapter. Before I attempted Chapter 6, I recruited some units with Hilda, Caspar, and Linhardt being permanent additions to the team, with the first 2 being pretty useful because of their personal skills, and Linhardt was good because he got Warp at A rank in Faith. Anyway, I now began Chapter 6, which was actually pretty difficult, as it has to be completed within 25 turns, and we also can't deploy Dimitri, who was like my best unit. My plan for this map was to take my entire team and head right For the archers blocking the way, I could just use gambits to take them out, and around this area, I lured in an archer and weakened and killed them with some gambits with Felix. With Catherine's high speed, I found it easy to clean up the 2 cavs and archer in this chamber, so now I could consider an option to approach this next area. Ultimately, a gambit to one-shot the mage and rattle the sword user seemed to be my best option, as then I could finish off another mage on the next turn, and from there the remaining foes weren't particularly threatening. For the Death Knight, I had a very specific plan to deal with them, and in order to do this I had to get pretty lucky and kill these 2 mages. That was pretty hard because my hit rates were bad. Once that was done, I opened the door and placed my tankiest unit, Dedue, in front of the door with 3 turns remaining. Here he could just barely survive the Death Knight's assault, and after this the Death Knight would canto far away along with the other cav who dealt 0 damage to Dedue. Next I could move away so the Death Knight would approach and be in the perfect position to kill, but the only way I could kill them was to rally up Catherine and go for a crit, which wasn't very likely to happen, and unsurprisingly I died here and had to reset. For attempt 2, I realized that Catherine needs more crit for this to be a viable strategy, so I switched her battalion to one that gave a little more crit, and after playing the chapter pretty much the exact same way as last time, I got back to where I lost before, and with a slightly higher crit chance of 20%, Catherine managed to land the crit this time around and I beat the chapter. In the monastery, I now recruited Ignatz, who I thought might be good because of his personal skill that grants hit plus 20, but his strength was just kind of too low and I didn't really end up using him. At this point in the game, there were a few paralogs I could attempt, but I decided to delay these for later, as right now my units aren't really strong enough to beat them. So I just did some generic battles, and after that I began Chapter 7, the Battle of the Eagle and Lion. What's convenient about this map is I don't really have to do much, as the Golden Deer and Black Eagles will pretty much kill each other if I leave them alone. I still wanted a little EXP, so on my first turn, I lured in 2 cavs, one to the left and another to the right. After taking them out, I baited in the Ignatz replacement and surrounded them for an easy kill. On the other side of the map, some flyers and Ferdinand started to push towards me, and the best way to deal with them was to just retreat for now. But on the next turn, I positioned to line up all 3 targets close together, so with a gambit boost, both of us could one-shot the flyer with a gambit and rattle the other 2 enemies, allowing us to survive enemy phase, then finish them off on the next turn. I now patiently waited for the battle at the bottom of the map to end, so the victors would charge towards me, in a convenient line that I could engage with some gambits. After reaching the center of the map, I soundly defeated Petra and placed my attention on Edelgard. Here I had a plan of using Dimitri to bait her into the Golden Deer archers. Unfortunately, that didn't work, and she charged towards my other units, and without Dimitri nearby, taking her down looked to be quite difficult. So at first, I had to set up some gambit boosts and go for a somewhat reliable assault troop that landed. Unfortunately, I didn't really have a safe follow-up, so my best choice for damage was another gambit, this time with Felix. With no more strong gambits available for me to use, I just had to punch her with Bolthus and hope it hit, which it did. With her gone, I could now focus on the 3 archers to the south who required a sacrifice to defeat, but that doesn't matter because units don't die when they are killed on this map, so now I could lure in Claude and then surround him so he couldn't attack, except that's what I thought would happen, but it turns out he can still use a gambit. Luckily it missed and he didn't kill anyone. Next turn I placed a sacrificial Hilda in his range, and his gambits were no longer a problem anymore, and I killed him with some punches with Dimitri. The only enemy remaining now was a basically defenseless healer, so it was easy to win from here. Now I recruited Lysithea for warp later, then checked out the newly unlocked battalions, with the Blue Lion archers with Retribution being the best available here. After a generic map, we moved on to Chapter 8. This map is pretty easy, none of the enemies are particularly strong, and at this point in the game my hit rates are pretty good, as most of my combat units have hit plus 20. So with Dimitri and Felix, I pushed towards the left side of the map and had a pretty easy time clearing out the villagers in the way, while the rest of my team could focus on the enemies near Geralt. After a few turns, one of the green units moved up, luring 3 powerful units in, that I locked in place with gambits. All the while, Dimitri moved down far enough for Solon to reveal himself, but for some reason, he just ran away. So with more gambits, I had to quickly clear a path towards him, then with Stride, I entered his attack range, so he turned around, and by utilizing 2 more gambits, we defeated him and beat the chapter. Now, in the monastery, we picked up the White Heron Cup quest, so we could pick a student to become a dancer, and I went with Petra. Now that I have a Dancer and Warp, most of the paralogs were relatively easy now, so I started my first one with Felix's. Here I strided Dimitri, rallied him, then moved him forward, danced, then used Warp to place him in range of the boss, who I was 1 damage off one-shotting with a Gambit, so I reset and gave him 1 more strength with a Rocky Burdock, and we got the kill this time around. Next up was the Lorenz paralog, where I just used my first turn to use Gambits to rattle the enemies to the center of the map so I could survive enemy phase, and then use Warp to place Dimitri in range to one-shot Acheron with a Gambit. I now proceeded on to Chapter 9, which was pretty tough as Demonic Beasts were particularly annoying for this run, as because they double me, it's really hard to safely attack them and deal much damage. First things first, I used 2 Gambits to break the armor of the nearby Demonic Beast, then I attacked with Byleth, Dimitri, and Felix to take out 1 HP bar, while Bolthus and Hilda approached the beast to the left. On my second turn, I realized that I don't do much damage, so I had to use another Gambit to chip this beast down to low health so Dimitri could finish them off. To the south, I observed that I couldn't really stop this beast from attacking the lower left student, as Bolthus just isn't tanky enough and doesn't do enough damage. So while my other units focused on taking out this beast to the right, I brought over Annette to use a Gambit, and with another from Hilda, I broke the beast's armor. However, I still couldn't safely defeat them, so the rest of my team had to retreat back to help defeat the monster, who I repositioned by using a Gambit with Hilda to bait them out of range of the beast just to the north, giving me the space to defeat them in the next 2 turns. While I was doing this, Geralt was just kind of running around near the top of the map, nearly getting himself killed, so I had to keep healing him as you game over if he dies. Luckily, he was actually being pretty useful here as he debuffed this beast, making it much easier to take them out. Next, I engaged the next squad with a Gambit from Petra so Dimitri could follow up. Then on the next turn, I could use a Gambit with Dimitri to fully break this beast's armor. And since Geralt protected us from the southern beast, I just had to handle one to the right now, which was easy with a healed up Dimitri. Since the right beast was now guaranteed to use an AoE attack, they wouldn't move if someone was in range of their attack, making it safe to Gambit the lower beast, then take out their first HP bar, and Geralt crit them to finish off their second HP bar. With just 1 beast remaining, a Blaze Gambit allowed me to safely break their armor so Geralt could come in there, get the kill, and then die. The next map I decided to take on was Hanuman and Manuela's paralog. To start the map off, I used a Gambit to secure a kill on the Swordmaster, then on the next turn I used 3 more Gambits to dispatch 3 of the incoming enemies, and with some punches I was lucky enough to finish off a 4th enemy. From here, I was pretty much able to fight the remaining enemies one at a time, so it was a little easier, but I still had to play fast as Manuela dies pretty quickly to the incoming enemies. Once I finished off this assassin, there was very little stopping me from defeating the boss. I just needed a single unit in range to attack to assist Dimitri, who I could warp in, so I used a Gambit with Byleth and a punch with Bolthus to clear the way forward, while Manuela used a Gambit to push away the incoming brawler that one-rounded her. Now I just warped Dimitri up and used 2 Gambits to swiftly handle the boss and beat the map. For Sylvain's paralog, I opted to deploy most of my strong units to the right side of the map, with Bolthus single-handedly able to fight the enemies to the north, and Dimitri, with a little support, was pretty much strong enough to kill every last one of them to the south, which left a majority of my weaker units on the left side of the map in a bad position, as they were really struggling with the archers, especially with hitting them, so Gambits were my best option to progress, and steadily I moved up towards the archer boss, and some thieves quickly approached my position. Fortunately, these 2 never attack, so I just had to block the escape points, and they were pretty inconsequential. Once the archer died, these 2 ran towards the right to face Bolthus, who was already dealing with another thief with ease. As for Dimitri, he's like really strong and can pretty much fight every enemy with ease, so cleaning up from this point onward was pretty easy, and I managed to pick up a majority of the treasure and win. Next up, I attempted the Sophis paralog. Here my plan was to just immediately rush the boss, but first I had to make sure Byleth was safe. So I just unequipped his weapon to prevent him from getting doubled, and eventually I moved him to a position where only 1 enemy could attack him, who were ideally the birds as they dealt less damage than the wolves. As for the rest of my team, they steadily moved down, and I engaged the birds with Dimitri, causing them to move. These birds fortunately have low defense, so with a couple Gambits to break their armor, I found it easy to take this first one out in a single turn. So now I could move further down and assist Dimitri with a Gambit securing me another another kill. Then with a Blaze Gambit, the remaining bird's armor was broken, and they were locked in place until the next turn. On this enemy phase, the boss began to advance, and unfortunately, because of this, I couldn't kill the bird on this turn, as I had to prioritize breaking the boss's armor, as I had to win on the next turn as a wolf from behind was rapidly approaching. Fortunately, Happy's personal skill directed the bird's attention to her, so my weak backline units were safe. Once that turn ended, I attacked with Dimitri, Catherine, then Dimitri again, dropping the boss to just low enough health that Felix could secure the kill with a shot with his bow, ending the chapter. The Ignatz and Raphael paralogue was super simple. I just killed this guy with Dimitri, danced him, and used Warp to deal big damage on the boss with a Gambit. Because of a Stride Gambit, Catherine as a flyer had the move to now use a punch to finish them off, and we won. Moving us on to chapter 10. At first, I baited in the enemies above and got some damage in with some bows, allowing a Gambit and Caspar to dispatch the mage, and with Bolfus and a crit with Dimitri, the beast was no longer a problem. So I felt confident to lure in more enemies with Byleth. Unfortunately, at the same time, some Cavs approached to the left side, along with another enemy squad. So with a Gambit, I assisted the team, allowing them to kill the 3 nearby enemies. Then I could dance Dimitri to place them in range to chip down the Cavs, making them easy to take out on the next turn. But on the turn after, the enemies to the right approached. I needed some help to safely engage them, so I had to warp Byleth down. With his help, I planned to defeat this archer, but I missed and had to use Dimitri and danced him to drop one of the beast's HP bars. Then on the next turn, him and Annette could finish them off, and thanks to a dance, the archer died too. The remaining 2 enemies were pretty weak, so now we had a clear path to the boss, who Dimitri one-shot with a Gambit. After a cutscene, we began the second part of the map. Here, I planned to use Warp to kill Solon as quick as possible, so I moved Happy and Dimitri and used a Gambit with Caspar to distract the nearby beast, and to survive enemy phase, I had to rally him so he wouldn't get doubled. With Shove on the next turn, Happy warped Dimitri up to Solon, and he one-shot him with a Gambit to clear the map. I now decided to do Dedue's paralogue, and for this map I had set up Dimitri to be in Battalion Vantage and Wrath range, so I could just warp him to the other side of the map and he could pretty much just one-shot every enemy over there. The rest of my team could advance north, and the enemies here were pretty easy to kill, as this paralogue is the first one you unlock, so the enemies are a pretty low level, making the map pretty unnoteworthy. And after defeating 20 units to make the green units run away, I defeated the boss to secure a win. Immediately after this, I tackled the Shamir and Alois paralogue. This one was really simple. I just moved Dimitri, Petra, and Happy south, and on like turn 2, I warped Dimitri over to the boss for an easy win. The next map was slightly more interesting, as it was the Catherine and Ash paralogue. On my first try here, I tried to use warps to defeat the bosses that spawn reinforcements on turn 1, but it turns out that if you do that, it just causes every unit on the map to run towards you, making it pretty hard to stay alive. So I tried the map again, and this time chose to not immediately defeat the commanders, and instead focused on clearing out as many units as possible in the surrounding area, like the mages, Cavs, and flyers who I baited out with Caspar. After enemy phase, I had to defeat the nearby enemies, which fortunately was easy with a few Gambits, so Dimitri could advance towards the upper left boss and the assassins. With Battalion Wrath active, he had a good chance to one-shot them, so he defeated them with relative ease. On the other side of the map, turn 3 enemy phase was coming up, where some flyer reinforcements would appear, so I decided to warp over Petra to allow Bolfus to dispatch the bishop, preventing any reinforcements from spawning. After taking down a lone mage, my center team was approached by a couple armored units, who initially seemed easy to deal with, but the fog was actually hiding some nearby flyers, so I had to use Divine Pulse and be more careful with my positioning to survive enemy phase. With a couple Gambits, I took those flyers down, while Dimitri defeated the other reinforcement spawning bishop. Then the only enemies that remained were an easy boss to the bottom right, and a few mages to the bottom left of the map, who were, as expected, easy, so now I could move on to the Seteth and Blaine paralogue. Because I didn't feel bothered to replace Seteth's lance with a broken one, he just can't attack on this map. Fortunately, this map isn't particularly hard, so it doesn't really matter. My main plan here was to just send Dimitri off to the ocean, as he was easily strong enough to take the sword users, as long as I kept him healed with healing focus. The rest of my team could use Gambits to steadily defeat the enemies in the way, and overall it wasn't too hard to reach the guy with the droppable Black Pearl, who I punched to death along with the priest near Dimitri, causing the remaining enemies to charge towards me, who Bolfus could easily handle with his high defense, With that map cleared, I now started Chapter 11. My plan here was to cheese it with Warp, but first I tried to feed a few kills to like Felix and Bolthus. On turn 2, my direct path to the Flame Emperor was blocked by some armors and an archer, so I had to use a gambit to lock them in place, and then I used another to take out the archer. On the turn after, the other group of enemies to the left were starting to be annoying, especially the archer. So first, I had to clear away past the monster with Dimitri, then I moved everyone else right. Annette could be attacked here, but with her weapon unequipped, she was fine, and the beast wasn't dangerous as they used an AoE. Finally, I could put my plan into action, as I could use Stride and Rally, then move up Dimitri, dance him, and use Warp. Here, he could destroy the Flame Emperor, and this map was over. For Chapter 12, I gave like all my stat boosters to Dimitri, as he pretty much has to solo Chapter 13, and I needed him to be as strong as possible to do that. As for this chapter, it was really simple. First, I strided and rallied Dimitri, then I smited Happy and moved Dimitri up to secure a kill. With Petra, I now danced him, and with Shove, I moved Happy in range to warp Dimitri just behind the enemies above, giving him a clear path to Edelgard, who he destroyed for an easy win. After Fales sets his big Dragon Ball blast attack to push rather than destroy, Byleth falls asleep for 5 years, and we begin Chapter 13. To start the map off, I use Retribution on Dimitri so he can counterattack on the archers. Then I placed him in a forest, and here you can see why this map is hard, as Dimitri is very unlikely to even hit the enemies, and the only way to kill them is to crit, which isn't reliable, but this time I got lucky. However, now I had to move him back to protect Byleth. After surviving enemy phase, our reinforcements appeared, and none of them could really fight. The best they could do was like heal Dimitri, who wasn't faring too well, as he was surrounded by enemies with Pass, who threatened a 1-round on Byleth, so I had to use a gambit to lock them in place, but this just caused Dimitri to die. So this time, I didn't attack with Byleth to reroll the RNG, and this time they survived and Dimitri was forced to use a gambit again. This only really delayed the inevitable though, as because of the Thieves and Assassins Pass, Byleth was guaranteed to die on the next turn, and without a gambit to save him, he died. I now decided to go back to turn 1, and without any crits, it looked nearly impossible to keep Byleth safe here. And that's not to mention that Dimitri's defenses aren't that great either, so he can die pretty quickly if I was unlucky. On my final Divine Pulse use, I returned to the first turn, and discovered something interesting here, which is if you're not in any enemy's range, none of the enemies get baited into moving, so I could wait in the starting area here for my reinforcements to appear. Additionally, this first thief here could actually be baited out without it luring in any additional enemies as well. This plan of waiting for my reinforcements to appear didn't really help much. All it really did was change how the enemies moved when I baited them into moving, which didn't really help me much because of this grappler, as he moved adjacent to this enemy, which now causes them and the surrounding units to move, which they didn't do before. I now reset, but before attempting the map again, I actually replayed the last map as I wanted the Aegis shield that I left on Bolthus, as with its protection, Byleth wouldn't get one-rounded by the assassins. Luckily, replaying this map is easy as I can just one-turn it, so if I have to make any small adjustments, it was pretty simple to do so. Anyway, on Chapter 13 again, I moved up aggressively with Dimitri to try to take out this grappler as fast as possible, but Dimitri just kinda died, so that didn't work. I now tried various other experimental plays with Dimitri, but they all pretty much ended the same. He just wasn't strong or accurate enough to win here, primarily thanks to his battalion that's forced on this chapter. Usually, it's a pretty good one, but for this challenge, at level 1, its 0 boost to hit was a huge problem. And another problem is Dimitri can't pre-damage it for this map, so Dimitri couldn't activate Battalion Wrath and Vantage. After about 5 failed attempts, I was pretty sure this map was impossible with my current setup, but on attempt 6, I discovered a new strategy that seemed to be my best option to win here, and this was all because I failed to kill this first thief here, who as a reminder doesn't bait out any other enemies. So I realized I could use this guy to damage Dimitri, and doing this would lower his battalion's durability, so slowly but surely I could safely drop him into Battalion Wrath and Vantage range, giving him much better damage and odds of survival. First, I had to replay the previous map to give him the correct skills, but now I was confident I could win. I began my winning attempt by moving Dimitri just on this forest tile. Here he defeated one enemy, but couldn't kill the sniper as they used a gambit. From here, I rushed Dimitri forward and used a gambit on the grappler, baiting in the enemies above, but with some crits, he was safe for now. But next turn, I had to retreat to keep Byleth safe. While I did this, Mercedes, Annette, and eventually Ash died, but I didn't care. I just wanted to win, and with crit after crit, I was. On this turn, I used a gambit, as it could force the snipers into attacking Dimitri rather than Byleth, so I could move one space down to be out of their range. After enemy phase, I made a mistake by attacking with Dimitri that caused Byleth to die. So after rewinding, I just moved Dimitri adjacent to Byleth so only one enemy could attack him, ensuring his survival. Now Dimitri only had to destroy the few remaining enemies for us to be done with the most difficult part about this map. The only problem was he didn't really have a battalion now, so I had to be careful with the next enemy group, as I placed Dimitri in a forest to maximize his avoid, but unfortunately he didn't crit the second enemy and his battalion withdrew. Then they landed a gambit and Dimitri didn't really stand a chance and died. With Divine Pulse, I now actually rewinded to a turn a couple turns back, as last time I attacked with Dimitri here and he lost some battalion durability. So by playing it slightly better, Dimitri had a little more endurance with his battalion, so he could take an extra attack before it broke this time. So I engaged this squad here and actually had better luck this time, as he crit twice then dodged the gambit. After killing this foe, enemy phase began again, and here he dodged another gambit, and he finished that squad off on the next two player phases. Right now, my plan was to rush directly towards the boss as fast as possible, so I moved Dimitri here, luring in a sniper that after this turn, he could no longer counterattack on since Retribution will expire. Because of the forest, Dimitri couldn't safely kill them, so he now had to retreat and lure them away. With them and another sniper defeated, I could punch the boss Palado, defeat him, and the next boss spawned in to the north. Before engaging him, I had to fight off an assassin, who was really strong, but Dimitri hit his attacks, so it didn't take too much to take them down. While Palado ran for the escape point, I slowed him down with two gambits with Felix, but Dimitri couldn't capitalize on this opportunity, as I wasn't confident I could take the assassins blocking the path to the boss. So I decided to run away and wait for Palado to advance, and him moving triggered a few enemies into moving who were aiming to kill Byleth, meaning I had to end the map and fast. So I moved Dimitri up so he was in range to attack Palado on the next turn, and fortunately Palado decided to gambit him. Here I tried to land the killing blow with Dimitri, but he missed twice. So I had to rewind, and now I attacked with Gilbert, re-rolling the RNG, forcing Dimitri to secure the kill this time around and end the map. In the monastery, we could now reclass Dimitri to a much stronger class with Warmaster, and looking at the available maps, the Hilda Paralog was a good opportunity to show off how much stronger he is, as I could use Retribution, then warp him up and deal massive damage to the warrior. Then I had to use Lysiphia's warp to move Happy out of enemy range. Now to the right side of the map, I used Stride with Cyril to send up Bolfus and Felix to dispatch one of the Northern Wyverns. On enemy phase, Dimitri destroyed almost all units that attacked him. The only exception was a sniper who used a gambit. So I decided to warp up Petra so Dimitri could kill both the giant bird and that sniper. On the other side of the map, I used a gambit to weaken the Wyvern threatening the green unit, while my other three units moved in to protect that green unit from further harm. Now on enemy phase, enemies to the north began to threaten the defend point, so I had to dance Dimitri back to use a punch to hold them off, but that wasn't enough to stop the Cavs, so I had to move in Hilda too. After surviving that turn, just a few more gambits was enough to hold off the enemies for another turn, but to the south, two enemy Cavs approached and none of my strong units were nearby to help, so I had to freeze them with a gambit, but they all missed, so I had to rewind then punch them with Caspar to reroll the RNG so Happy could land the gambit for a kill. From here, defending the left side was pretty easy, but on the right side of the map, the boss approached and I was unable to attack them, so I had to focus this archer down, and I now just barely survived enemy phase. With a gambit from Bolfus, I managed to take them out, and from here, it was easy to route the map and finish the chapter. Next up was chapter 14. At first, I used Retribution on Dimitri and warped him up to kill the scary flyer, and placed Felix here to block this choke to protect my fragile units. On the other side of the map, I couldn't kill the two nearby units, so my best bet was to use a gambit to stun them. The first one failed, but the second succeeded and allowed Volfus to secure a kill on enemy phase. As for Dimitri, he almost has a 100% chance to crit, and his hit rates are pretty good too, so with ease he destroyed any enemies that came in contact with him. On my second turn, I defeated the Pegasus with Byleth, but this unfortunately placed him in range of an enemy cav to the right, so I had to warp him one space left with Lysithea. Towards the right, I had moved Dimitri back to defeat this cav, and for the two cavs approaching from the right, I had to take a risk and attack with Felix and Caspar. With that kill secured, I had to freeze the remaining cav with another gambit, and on the next turn, after dispatching them, Dimitri was able to march north to destroy the reinforcements. After a few uneventful turns, my left squad approached the side objective, and they managed to clear the way forward with a couple gambits, so the Swordmaster swiftly reached the point and unleashed the fire attack. Now, no more reinforcements will spawn, so I just had to clean up the top center of the map, and that was easy with Dimitri and his massive damage output. So once Randolph died, the map ended. In the monastery, we now gained access to the secret shop for more stat boosters to give to Dimitri. And additionally, we now unlocked some paralogs, so I started Marianne's, where I stride most of my units, then use a torch with Felix to reveal the boss. Now I used 3 warps to send in Petra, Dimitri and Volfus, and now I had the pieces in place to kill the boss. At first I had to break its armor, so I used a gambit with Marianne, and now Dimitri could punch them to annihilate 1 HP bar, then with a dance he destroyed another. With the Blue Line Dancers Battalion, I now danced both Dimitri and Petra, allowing Dimitri to act 2 additional times, securing me the win with his big strong punches. The Legend of the Lake was also a pretty simple paralog. First, I just used a torch to reveal the wyverns, then used 2 gambits to take one down. With Dimitri, I defeated another, and Felix could gambit down the third. After using Retribution on Dimitri, it was safe to warp him north to clear out the 3 snipers. So next turn, I could safely warp in 3 more strided allies, so I could break the boss's armor and start attacking with Dimitri to drop their first HP bar. I then danced with Petra and assumed I couldn't kill them this turn, so I opted to use a gambit, directing the boss's attack his direction, and with Battalion Wrath, Dimitri easily crit to take out the boss's second HP bar on enemy phase. Then, with a few crits on player phase, the third was dropped with ease. But the fourth wasn't going to be as easy, as they gained quick riposte here, so Dimitri couldn't quad attack anymore. Fortunately, he landed a crit here, and with a little manipulation with rewinds, he crit again to drop the boss out of quick riposte range, meaning he could now quad to finally finish off their final HP bar and end the map. After I completed a generic skirmish map, I moved on to chapter 15, where I sent Dimitri up to take out an archer, while the rest of my team was in the enemy squad to the right. With some gambits, I now secured a few kills for some EXP, but then I just cheesed the map by moving Dimitri up, dancing him and warping him in range of the boss. That he won rounds, so it was easy. Another easy map was the Raya Paralog, where I do the usual of warping Dimitri to place him in range of the first enemy commander, who he killed, and then danced him and moved him up 1 and to the right, then danced both Dimitri and Petra with Dance of the Goddess. With a gambit, Dimitri destroyed another commander and rattled the remaining 2 commanders. With Petra, Dimitri could move yet again and defeat another enemy boss. Now, while it may appear that my units are positioned to die on enemy phase, this boss always attacks before the other enemies, so I can just kill them on enemy phase and end the map before anyone died. For chapter 16, I used Stride and Retribution on Dimitri, then warped him north to defeat the Ferdinand replacement, calling in some reinforcements. Since I couldn't win on this turn, I now just warped Petra north and positioned Byleth in range to be warped north, who had Dance of the Goddess. To deal with Acheron, I moved Felix and Volfus left and ended my turn. With relative ease, Dimitri defeated most units that engaged him. The only survivors were units that used gambits, like Lorenz, who I swiftly dispatched at the start of the next turn. Then I used Stride to affect Byleth and Marianne, and warped them up so Marianne could use Stride on Dimitri, and Byleth could dance them with his gambit. After clearing the way to Ladislava, I danced again and punched her to death. To defeat the only remaining enemy commander, I just had to use some gambits, and then the chapter was beaten. Anyway, on chapter 17, Dimitri claims he will
Kill every last one of them!
And by that, he means he and some allies are going to move towards the right, just in position that he and 2 others can be warped south in range to kill Claude. Then Petra could dance to move Dimitri slightly, then with a gambit, I danced them both and they ran right. And with a dance, he had enough move to reach Edelgard and pummel her to death, ending the chapter. For chapter 18, I stride and use a gambit with Lysithea to drop this guy's armor, so Dimitri can deal massive damage and can be danced to deal huge damage again. With Dance of the Goddess, I danced all 3 allies, but I couldn't quite kill this guy, so I just walked Dimitri, gained a little EXP, and beat the map with very little effort. Speaking of very little effort, the Dimitri paralogue was pretty easy. To beat it, I just walked Petra and Dimitri, then killed the enemy blocking the path to the boss, and then just killed the boss to win the chapter. Chapter 19 is home to a female War Master, and other than that, it isn't very noteworthy, as I just walked Dimitri twice to reach the boss and kill them on turn 1. Chapter 20 goes pretty similarly, as I stride Dimitri, move him up, move him further north, and next send in Happy, who gets danced by Byleth's Gambit, along with Petra, who dances Dimitri, while Happy warps him, placing him in position to defeat the Death Knight. After choosing to marry everyone's favourite warper, which is Happy, we moved on to chapter 21, which took a little more thinking than the previous maps, as Dimitri starts far away from the boss Hubert, and it seemed impossible for him to close the distance in just a single turn. So at first, I tried to use Catherine, who was a flyer, to kill him on turn 1, but that didn't exactly turn out well. Next time, I just transported Dimitri as far left as possible with Warp and Stride, and my plan was to kill the boss on the next turn. But to the left side of the map, I had to protect my supporters, so I used a gambit with Felix and blocked this choke over here, and this resulted in Hilda dying, which I didn't really care about, as on my next turn I used a Dance of the Goddess gambit to warp Dimitri, Petra, and Lysithea north, allowing Dimitri to move up, get danced, get warped, and be in range to attack and defeat Hubert. Finally moving us on to the final chapter. After carefully preparing and giving Dimitri all of my remaining stat boosters, I was ready to beat the game. I started the map by using Lysithea and Happy to warp Dimitri into Edelgard's chamber, which will stop her from using her long-range attacks. After ending my turn, Happy may have died, and Dimitri began to annihilate every last unit in the final chamber, giving him a clear path towards Edelgard, who he could quad, and if I was lucky, he could take out a HP bar. Unfortunately though, he missed his final attack here. As for my units to the south, they weren't really being pressured much, the enemies in the nearby rooms didn't seem to move towards them, so only the reinforcements were a problem. Fortunately, I had gambits to hold them off for a couple turns, so as long as Dimitri was fast, the reinforcements shouldn't have killed anyone, which he was as he took out Edelgard's first HP bar on this turn, and then finished off the second on the next turn. With some chip from enemy phase, the third was easy to take out. However, some Dark Knight reinforcements approached my southern team, so I had to send in a sacrificial Catherine who dodged 2 attacks coming her direction, but unfortunately got crit by the third and died. And her sacrifice paved the way to my victory, as I used Stride and warped both Byleth and Petra, then used a gambit with Dimitri to drop Edelgard's armor, then Petra danced Byleth to allow him to reach Dimitri, and danced him with a gambit, then by punching, he defeated Edelgard and I beat the game. Anyway, subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed. Bye.